The first drops of autumn rain kissed the cobblestones of Valmont's capital as Prince Adrian stood at his chamber window, watching the city below transform into a watercolor of greys and golds. His reflection in the glass showed a young man of 26 summers, with dark hair that fell slightly into eyes the color of stormy seas, and a jaw set with the kind of determination that came from a lifetime of preparation for a throne he wasn't certain he wanted. Tonight, everything would change. Tonight, he would disappear. The palace behind him hummed with preparations for the upcoming royal wedding, his wedding to Lady Seraphine Ashford, daughter of the Duke of Wintermere. Their betrothal had been announced 6 months prior, a strategic alliance that would unite the two most powerful families in the kingdom. Seraphine was everything a future queen should be: elegant, educated, politically astute, and breathtakingly beautiful. Yet Adrian felt nothing when he looked at her. Nothing but the cold weight of duty pressing against his chest like armor that no longer fit. "Your Highness, are you certain about this?" The voice belonged to Marcus, his personal guard and closest friend since childhood, the only person who knew what Adrian planned to do. Adrian turned from the window, his expression resolute. "More certain than I've been about anything in my life. I need to know, Marcus. I need to see this court, this life, from outside these suffocating walls. How can I rule these people if I don't understand how they truly live? And how can I marry a woman I've only seen through the lens of courtly performance?" Marcus sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "And if you're discovered, then I'll face whatever consequences come." Adrian moved to the modest bundle of clothing on his bed, simple servant's garb that Marcus had procured. "But I don't intend to be discovered. As far as anyone knows, Prince Adrian has retired to his private estate for contemplation before the wedding. You'll handle any inquiries. I'll be back in 3 weeks before anyone suspects." 3 weeks as a servant," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "Your father would have you imprisoned in the tower for this madness." "My father is dead," Adrian said quietly, his fingers tracing the rough fabric of the servant's tunic. "And perhaps that's why I must do this now. Before I become so entrenched in this role that I forget there's a world beyond protocol and politics." He looked up at his friend. "I need to know if Seraphine is who she appears to be. I need to see her when she doesn't know she's being watched. And I need to understand what really happens in the shadows of this palace." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then go. But be careful, my friend. The truth you seek may not be the truth you wish to find." Those words echoed in Adrian's mind hours later, as he descended the servant's staircase in his new identity. His hair had been darkened with dye, his expensive rings removed, his posture carefully adjusted to reflect someone accustomed to bowing rather than being bowed to. He had given himself a new name, Thomas Blackwood, and a simple backstory as the nephew of a palace gardener seeking work. The head steward, an efficient woman named Mrs. Thornbury, who had been carefully selected for her discretion, knew his true identity and had agreed to place him in various roles throughout the palace. Her first assignment sent him to the kitchens. The heart of the palace kitchens was a world Adrian had never truly witnessed. Heat rolled from massive stone ovens where bread baked in perfect golden rows. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, fresh herbs, and something sweet that made his mouth water despite the nerves coiling in his stomach. Servants moved in orchestrated chaos, chopping, stirring, carrying heavy platters with practiced ease. The noise was overwhelming after the hushed reverence of the royal chambers, full of shouted orders, clattering pots, and occasional bursts of laughter that seemed almost foreign in their genuine warmth. "You must be the new boy," a gruff voice announced. Adrian turned to find the head cook, a barrel-chested man with flour dusting his impressive mustache. "Mrs. Thornbury sent word. I'm Chef Bernard. You'll start with the scullery work, carrying supplies, cleaning. Think you can manage that?" "Yes, sir," Adrian replied, keeping his voice steady and his eyes appropriately downcast. This was what servants did. He had observed enough to know. They made themselves small, invisible, forgettable. "Good. We're short-handed tonight with that new girl arriving. Ilara, I think her name is. Supposed to be skilled with pastries, but we'll see. Everyone thinks they can cook until they face my kitchens." Chef Bernard waved a massive hand toward a corridor lined with storage rooms. Start by bringing up 3 sacks of flour from the lower pantry, and don't dawdle, we've got the evening meal to prepare. Adrian nodded and headed in the indicated direction, his muscles already protesting the weight of the first flour sack. He had trained in swordsmanship and horseback riding, but hauling supplies was an entirely different challenge. By the time he returned with the 3rd sack, his back ached and sweat dampened his borrowed shirt. He set it down near the preparation tables, trying not to show how much the effort had cost him. That was when he saw her. She stood at the far end of the kitchen, her back to him, wearing a simple dress of dove grey covered by a white apron. Her hair, the colour of autumn chestnuts, was pulled back in a practical braid that fell between her shoulder blades. She was working at a marble pastry board, her hands moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost like a dance as she folded butter into dough. There was something about the way she held herself, straight-backed but not rigid, confident but not arrogant, that caught his attention like a hook snagging silk. "That's Ilara Wynne," a voice murmured beside him. Adrian glanced over to find a young scullery maid with red hair and curious eyes. "Just arrived this morning from the countryside. They say she trained under the royal pastry chef in the eastern provinces before he retired." The girl leaned closer, conspiratorial. "She's pretty, isn't she? But she keeps to herself. Already turned down 3 offers to take a walk from the footman." Adrian found he couldn't look away. "Has she met the prince's fiancée yet?" "Lady Seraphine? Not that I know of." "Why would she? The lady doesn't exactly visit the kitchens," the maid giggled. "Though I hear she's very particular about her meals, sends back anything that isn't absolutely perfect." Before Adrian could respond, Chef Bernard's voice boomed across the kitchen. "Ilara, let's see what you can do with those cream puffs for tonight's dessert. And you, Thomas, stop gawking and get those vegetables washed. We don't pay you to stand around like a statue." Adrian moved quickly to his assigned task, but his eyes kept drifting back to Ilara. She had turned slightly and he could see her profile now, the delicate curve of her cheek, the concentration that furrowed her brow, the way she bit her lower lip slightly as she worked. There was something deeply genuine about her, something that reminded him of clear water after a lifetime of drinking wine from jeweled goblets. She didn't seem to notice the chaos around her, existing in a pocket of calm focus that was almost meditative. Hours passed in a blur of work. Adrian washed vegetables until his hands were raw, carried platters to the serving staff, cleaned spills, and scrubbed pots with a vigor born of determination not to fail at even the most menial task. The physical labor was exhausting in a way that sword practice had never been, perhaps because it lacked the glory, the purpose he had always attached to his princely training. This was simply work, necessary and unnoticed, and he found a strange humility in it. As the evening meal was being served in the great hall above, the kitchen staff finally had a moment to breathe. Adrian found himself near the cooling racks, where Ilara was carefully arranging her cream puffs, each one a perfect golden dome, topped with a delicate swirl of chocolate. Up close, he could see the fine details he had missed from across the room, the dusting of flour on her wrist, the small burn scar on her forearm that spoke of years working near hot ovens, the way her fingers moved with the precision of an artist. "They're beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Ilara looked up, startled, and for the first time he saw her eyes fully. They were a remarkable shade of green, like forest moss in morning light, and they held an intelligence and wariness that made him feel suddenly transparent, as if she could see through his disguise with a single glance. But then she smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to something that made his breath catch. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Though beauty means nothing if they don't taste right, my grandmother always said that food should please the soul, not just the eyes." "Your grandmother was wise." Adrian found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Did she teach you to cook?" "She taught me everything," Ilara replied, returning her attention to her pastries. "After my parents died when I was young, she raised me in her little cottage outside the eastern province. She was the cook for a minor lord's household, before age forced her to retire. Every recipe, every technique, every secret about how to make butter sing and sugar dance, she passed it all to me." There was a sadness in her voice, sweet and aching, like a minor chord. She died last spring, that's why I'm here. I needed to start over somewhere, and the palace was hiring. I'm sorry for your loss, Adrian said, and he meant it. He had lost his father 2 years ago, and the grief still came in unexpected waves. Starting over takes courage. Elara glanced at him again, and this time her gaze lingered, assessing. You're the new one too, aren't you? Thomas, they said. Yes, I'm just finding my feet here. It's overwhelming at first, she said, and there was kindness in her tone. All the noise and the rushing and the hierarchy. But you'll adapt. People do. She picked up one of the cream puffs, examined it critically, then set it aside. Where did you come from? Adrian had prepared his story, but under the directness of her green eyes, the lies felt heavier than the flour sacks. From the city, mostly. I've done various work. My uncle suggested I try the palace. He changed the subject quickly. Have you met many of the court yet? Met them? No. Served them? Constantly. Ilara's lips quirked in a wry smile. They don't see us, you know. To them we're hands that appear with food and disappear again, invisible servants for invisible lives. She paused, her expression growing more thoughtful. Though I did catch a glimpse of Lady Seraphine yesterday. She came down to complain about the seasoning on her pheasant. Adrian's attention sharpened. What was she like? Beautiful, cold. Ilara said it matter-of-factly, without malice. She spoke to Chef Bernard as if he were something unpleasant on her shoe, demanded that whoever had prepared her meal be dismissed. She shook her head. It was perfectly cooked. I watched Jacques prepare it myself, but apparently it wasn't to her exacting standards. Something uncomfortable twisted in Adrian's chest. He had never seen Seraphine interact with servants. Their courtship, if it could be called that, had consisted of formal dinners, chaperoned walks in the garden, and political discussions that felt more like negotiations than conversations. She had always been gracious to him, poised and appropriate, but he realized now that he had never witnessed how she treated those she considered beneath her. The prince must love her very much, Ilara said, breaking into his thoughts. To marry someone like that. You think love has anything to do with royal marriages? Adrian asked, unable to keep a bitter edge from his voice. Ilara looked at him with surprise, then something that might have been understanding. No, I suppose not. They marry for kingdoms and alliances, don't they? How sad to never choose your own heart. She returned to her work, carefully boxing the cream puffs for presentation. But perhaps Lady Seraphine is different in private. Perhaps she's kind to the prince, and that's what matters. Adrian wanted to tell her that Seraphine had never shown him any particular kindness or unkindness, that their interactions felt like chess moves, strategic and calculated. But Thomas Blackwood wouldn't know such things, so he remained silent, helping Ilara carry her creations to the service area. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely liberating. Adrian worked from before dawn until after dark, his hands roughening with labor, his body learning the particular aches of servant life. He carried firewood and scrubbed floors, served meals and cleaned chambers, moving through the palace he had lived in all his life as if seeing it for the first time. And in those days, he began to see the truth of his kingdom in ways that had been hidden from him behind the walls of privilege. He saw how the servants spoke in hushed tones about not having enough food for their own families, while they prepared banquets that could feed a village. He saw how the older staff bore injuries from years of hard labor, injuries that would have been treated immediately if they had occurred to someone of noble birth. He saw the hierarchy even among the servants themselves, the tiny cruelties and kindnesses that made up their world, and he saw how they looked at each other with a camaraderie born of shared struggle, a warmth that was absent in the polished interactions of the court. But more than anything, he found himself seeking out Ilara. It started innocently enough, finding reasons to be in the kitchen during her shifts, offering to help carry her supplies or clean her workspace. She accepted his assistance with quiet gratitude, and gradually they began to talk. Not the careful, measured conversations of the court, but real discussions that ranged from her grandmother's old recipes to his fabricated stories of life in the city, from the beauty of sunrise over the palace gardens to the small rebellions of choosing joy in a world that often seemed designed to crush it. Ilara had a way of looking at the world that fascinated him. She found wonder in simple things, the way light fell through a window, the perfect rise of bread dough, the first bite of an apple in autumn. She spoke with an honesty that was almost painful in its purity, never saying what she thought others wanted to hear, only what she believed to be true. And slowly, Adrian realized that he was laughing more in her presence than he had in years, that her smile had become something he looked forward to with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into his disguise, they found themselves alone in the kitchen after the dinner service. The other staff had retired to their quarters, exhausted from a particularly demanding day, but Ilara had stayed behind to prepare pastry dough for the morning, and Adrian had volunteered to help despite his own fatigue. "You don't have to stay," Ilara said, her hands working the dough with rhythmic precision. "I can manage." "I know," Adrian replied, measuring out flour as she had taught him. "But I enjoy this. The quiet, the work. It's peaceful." Ilara smiled, that small, genuine expression that never failed to move something in his chest. "Most people hate kitchen duty. They think it's beneath them." "Nothing honest is beneath anyone," Adrian said, then worried he had spoken too much like a prince. But Ilara simply nodded, appreciation in her eyes. "You're different from the others," she observed, sprinkling water over the dough. "The way you speak, the way you move. Sometimes I wonder if you're really just a gardener's nephew." Adrian's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Nothing sinister," Ilara laughed, the sound like bells. "Just that you seem educated, thoughtful, like you've read books and had time to contemplate the world. Most people who work here started so young, they never had that chance." She paused in her kneading, looking at him directly. "Did you run from something, Thomas? Is that why you're here?" The question was too close to the truth. Adrian swallowed hard. "Maybe I'm running towards something instead of away." "That's a nice thought," Ilara said softly. "I like to think I'm doing the same, running toward a new life, a fresh start." She resumed her work, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to cook for people who truly appreciated it, not because the food is a display of wealth or status, but because it brings them joy. To create something beautiful and nourishing and see it make someone happy. You do that already," Adrian said. "I've watched people's faces when they taste your pastries. You give them a moment of sweetness in lives that might not have much of it." Ilara stopped kneading, her hands still in the dough, and looked at him with an expression that made his breath shallow. There was something in her eyes, a softness, a question, a possibility that hung in the air between them, like the flower dust catching the lamplight. For a moment, Adrian thought she might say something, might acknowledge the strange connection that had been growing between them like a vine, slow and persistent and impossible to ignore. But then footsteps echoed in the corridor, sharp and purposeful, and they both stepped back from each other as if caught in some transgression. A moment later, Lady Seraphine swept into the kitchen, her silk gown a deep burgundy that seemed to absorb the light. Behind her followed her lady's maid, looking uncomfortable in the functional space. "I'm told the new pastry cook works here," Seraphine said without preamble, her eyes scanning the kitchen with barely concealed distaste. "I have specific requirements for the wedding cake, and I refuse to trust them to a written message." Ilara curtsied, her demeanor shifting instantly to the careful deference expected of servants. "My lady, I am Ilara Wynne, the pastry cook. How may I serve you?" Adrian had moved into the shadows near the storage shelves, his heart pounding. This was the first time he had been in the same room with his fiancée since assuming his disguise, and the fear of discovery warred with his curiosity about what Seraphine might reveal when she thought no one of importance was watching. "The cake must be 5 tiers, Seraphine began, her tone that of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "White almond with rose water cream, each tier decorated with sugar flowers, orchids specifically, and pearl drops made of fondant. The top must feature the royal crest in edible gold. Can you manage that, or shall I request someone more experienced from the capital?" "I can create exactly what you've described, my lady," Ilara said calmly, "though if I may suggest, white almond can be quite delicate." If the weather is warm during the wedding festivities, a lemon cake might hold better and provide a lovely complement to the rose water. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. I didn't ask for your suggestions. I gave you instructions. The prince adores almond cake, or so I've been told, and I intend to please him. Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After all, keeping one's husband satisfied is essential for maintaining influence. Wouldn't you agree? Something about the way she said it, the calculated coldness beneath the words, sent a chill through Adrian. She spoke of pleasing him, as if it were a business strategy, not an act of affection. Of course, my lady, Elara replied, her voice neutral, but Adrian could see the slight tension in her shoulders. Good. I'll return in 3 days to see your progress. If it isn't absolutely perfect, you'll be dismissed. I won't have incompetence marring my wedding. Seraphine turned to leave, then paused, her gaze falling on Adrian in the shadows. You there, boy? Why are you lurking in corners? Adrian stepped forward, keeping his eyes down. I was helping with the evening preparations, my lady. Forgive me. Seraphine studied him for a moment, and Adrian felt the weight of her scrutiny like a physical thing. But then she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Servants and their inefficiency. See that you work harder. The palace doesn't need lazy hands. With that, she swept out of the kitchen, her maid scurrying behind her. The silence that followed felt heavy. Elara stood very still, her hands still dusted with flour, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she returned to her dough, but Adrian noticed that her movements had lost their earlier fluidity, now mechanical and tense. Elara, he said softly, moving closer, are you all right? Of course, she replied, but her voice was tight. She's the future queen. She has every right to demand perfection. She had no right to threaten you, Adrian said, anger heating his words. You're a skilled pastry cook and she should show you respect. Elara looked up at him, surprise and something like gratitude flickering across her face. That's kind of you to say, but respect isn't something people like us can expect from people like her. That's just how the world works, Thomas. Maybe it shouldn't work that way, Adrian said fiercely. Maybe the world needs to change. For a long moment, Elara simply looked at him, and in her eyes Adrian saw understanding dawn. You really did run from something, didn't you? She whispered. From a world where you had to accept injustice and couldn't speak against it. It was close enough to the truth that Adrian couldn't deny it. Perhaps, he admitted, perhaps I'm tired of being complicit in a system that values people based on the circumstances of their birth rather than the content of their character. Elara's expression softened, and she reached out, her flour-dusted hand briefly touching his. The contact was brief, innocent, but it sent electricity through Adrian's entire body. Then we're more alike than I thought, she said, both trying to find a place in a world that doesn't seem made for people like us. People like us? Adrian echoed. People who want to matter, Elara said simply. People who want their lives to mean something more than just serving the ambitions of others. In that moment, Adrian felt something shift inside him, a fundamental realignment of everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. Here was a woman who had nothing, no title, no wealth, no power, yet she possessed a dignity and wisdom that shamed most of the nobility he knew. And more than that, she saw him, not the prince hidden beneath servants' clothing, but something essential and true that he had almost forgotten existed. I should go, he said, though everything in him wanted to stay. But Elara, if you need help with the wedding cake, with anything, I'm here. She smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile. Thank you, Thomas, that means more than you know. As Adrian made his way to the servants' quarters that night, his mind spun with revelations. In 2 weeks, he had learned more about his kingdom and himself than in 26 years of royal education. He had seen the casual cruelty of the nobility, the quiet strength of the servants, and the vast gulf between the world he had inhabited and the world that existed just beneath it. But more than any of that, he had discovered something he hadn't been looking for, something that terrified him with its implications. He was falling in love with Elara Wynne. Not the careful political affection that was expected between him and Seraphine, not the practical partnership that royal marriages were built on, but something raw and real and utterly impossible. He loved the way she moved through the world with quiet confidence, the way she found beauty in simple things, the way she treated everyone with the same honest kindness, regardless of their station. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her wisdom and her dreams, her laugh and the serious way she considered questions before answering them. And it was precisely that love that made his situation so unbearably complicated. Because he wasn't Thomas Blackwood, a simple servant who might hope to court a kitchen maid. He was Crown Prince Adrian of Valmont, engaged to be married to another woman in a matter of weeks, and every moment he spent with Elara was a lie built on lies, a betrayal of her trust and his own honor. That night Adrian lay awake in the narrow servant's bed, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with his conscience. He had started this masquerade to learn the truth about his court and his fiancée. Well, he had learned it. Seraphine was exactly what she appeared to be, beautiful and cold and calculating, a woman who saw marriage as a tool for power rather than a union of hearts. She would make an excellent queen in the political sense, but the thought of spending his life with her now filled him with a dread that bordered on despair. The right thing to do would be to end his disguise immediately, reveal himself, and face the consequences. But every time he considered it, he thought of Elara's face when she discovered his deception, the betrayal in her eyes, the knowledge that everything between them had been built on his lies. She would hate him, and he would deserve it. Yet continuing the lie felt equally unbearable, because every honest word she spoke to Thomas was a word she wouldn't have spoken to Prince Adrian, and he was stealing those words, those moments, that trust under false pretenses. He was trapped, caught between duty and desire, between the life he was born to live and the life he was beginning to wish he could have. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of confusion and growing attachment. Adrian continued his work, his disguise now second nature, and he continued to seek out Elara's company whenever possible. They fell into an easy companionship, talking during shared shifts, stealing moments of conversation in the early morning hours when the kitchen was quiet, finding excuses to work side by side. Elara taught him to make bread, her hands guiding his through the kneading process, and Adrian found unexpected joy in the simple act of creation. He told her stories, carefully edited versions of his life, about growing up in the palace grounds, about the weight of expectations and the loneliness of always being watched. She listened with an attention that made him feel truly heard for the first time in his life, and she shared her own stories, tales of her grandmother's wisdom and her dreams of one day having her own bakery where she could create freely. "I'd call it wins," she told him one evening, her eyes distant with imagination. "Simple and honest like my grandmother, and I'd bake bread for the whole neighborhood every morning, and pastries that would make children's eyes light up, and wedding cakes for people who were truly in love." She blushed then, as if embarrassed by her own dreams. "It's foolish, I know. I'd need money I don't have, and who would patronize a shop run by a woman alone?" "It's not foolish," Adrian said fiercely. "It's beautiful, and you should do it, Elara. You should chase that dream with everything you have." She looked at him with such tender affection that his heart ached. "You believe in me," she said softly. "No one besides my grandmother ever did that before." "Then everyone else is a fool," Adrian replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. But even as their connection deepened, Adrian became increasingly aware of the danger they were in. Not just the danger of his secret being revealed, but something more insidious. He had begun to notice things, small details that didn't quite fit together. Seraphine's visits to the kitchen became more frequent, always with some new demand or criticism, and always with that calculating look in her eyes that made Adrian uneasy. He saw her speaking in hushed tones with certain courtiers, men he knew to be ambitious and unscrupulous. He saw the way she smiled at nobles with influence, and dismissed those without it. And then one night everything changed. It was late, past midnight, and Adrian had been unable to sleep. He had taken to walking the palace corridors during these restless hours, using his servant's anonymity to observe the court after it had dropped its daytime masks. He was passing near the private parlor reserved for high-ranking guests when he heard voices, low and urgent, coming from behind the partially open door. "The wedding must proceed as planned," a male voice said, cultured and cold. "Once Seraphine is queen, we'll have the access we need." "And the prince?" That was Seraphine's voice, unmistakable in its icy precision. He's proving more difficult than anticipated. He actually seems to care about policy and the welfare of common people. It's tedious. He won't be a problem for long. A different male voice, rougher. Accidents happen, especially to young kings who don't understand the realities of power. A hunting mishap, perhaps. A sudden illness. Once he's gone and you're regent for your future son, we can implement the real changes. Adrian's blood turned to ice. He pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing, straining to hear every word. "You're certain it can be done without suspicion?" Seraphine asked, and there was no hesitation in her voice, no moral qualm. She was discussing his murder with the casual efficiency of planning a menu. "Absolutely certain, my lady. We have people in place. The prince trusts too easily, sees the best in everyone. It will be simple." "Good, because I didn't spend years cultivating this match to waste it on a lifetime of pretending to love a naive fool who thinks he can rule with compassion and mercy." Seraphine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He actually believes the common people matter, as if they're anything more than tools to serve the nobility's interests." Adrian's hands clenched into fists so tight his nails drew blood. For a moment, rage overwhelmed every other emotion. This woman, whom he had been prepared to marry out of duty, whom his father had chosen as the perfect future queen, was planning his assassination. Not in a fit of passion or madness, but with cold, calculated efficiency. She had never cared for him, had never even pretended to care when she thought no one was watching. He was simply an obstacle to be removed once he had served his purpose of making her queen. He forced himself to remain still, to listen as they discussed details, timetables, and contingencies. He committed every word to memory, every name mentioned. And when they finally dispersed, melting into different corridors like conspirators in the night, Adrian waited in the shadows until he was certain they were gone. His first instinct was to go directly to Marcus, to reveal everything and have Seraphine arrested immediately. But even through his fury, Adrian's mind worked with a clarity born of royal training. He needed more than one overheard conversation. He needed evidence, documentation, something that would convince the council and prevent any doubt. Seraphine's father was powerful, and her co-conspirators held significant influence. A premature accusation could fail, could even be turned against him. But there was someone else who had access to places he didn't, someone who moved through the palace unseen, someone he trusted more than anyone else in his disguise. Ilara. The next morning, Adrian found her in the kitchen as usual, preparing the daily bread. She looked up at his approach and her smile faded immediately. "Thomas, what's wrong? You look terrible." He realized he must look as haggard as he felt. He hadn't slept, had spent the night pacing his small room and planning. "Ilara, I need to talk to you privately, it's urgent." Concern filled her eyes, but she nodded. "There's a storage room at the end of the west corridor. No one uses it this time of day. 5 minutes." When they met in the cramped space among sacks of grain and hanging herbs, Adrian closed the door and faced her, his heart pounding. How much could he tell her? How much should he tell her? She deserved the truth, but the truth was so tangled with his own deception that he didn't know where to begin. "Thomas, you're frightening me," Ilara said, reaching out to touch his arm. "What's happened?" "I overheard something last night," Adrian began, choosing his words carefully. "A conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Lady Seraphine and some men, talking about the prince, about the wedding. Ilara, they're planning to kill him." Ilara's face went pale. "Kill the prince? That's treason, that's—" She stopped, horror dawning in her expression. "Thomas, if you heard this, if they find out you know, they'll kill you too." "I know." Adrian took her hands, desperate to make her understand. "But I can't go to the authorities without proof. They're powerful people, and it would be my word against theirs. I need evidence, something concrete. And I think there might be documents, letters perhaps, somewhere in Lady Seraphine's chambers." Understanding and fear warred in Ilara's eyes. "You want me to search her rooms?" "I would never ask you to put yourself in danger," Adrian said quickly. "But you have access to the upper floors when you deliver morning pastries. If you could just look, just see if there's anything—" "Of course I'll do it," Ilara interrupted, her voice steady, despite the fear Adrian could see in her face. "If what you say is true, if they're planning to murder the prince, then someone has to stop them, even if that someone is just a kitchen maid and a gardener's nephew. Adrian felt emotion clog his throat. Here was true courage, not the battlefield bravery that was celebrated in songs, but the quiet determination to do what was right, even when it meant risking everything. "Ilara, you're the bravest person I've ever known." She smiled, though it trembled at the edges. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. But my grandmother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it." She squeezed his hands. "Besides, I've grown fond of you, Thomas Blackwood. I won't let anything happen to you if I can help it." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Adrian wanted to tell her everything in that moment, wanted to confess his true identity and the depth of his feelings for her. But the timing was wrong, the danger too immediate. So instead he simply held her hands and said, "I've grown fond of you too, more than I should have, perhaps." Ilara's eyes searched his face, and for a moment Adrian thought she might kiss him, or he might kiss her, or the space between them might simply disappear because it was too small to contain what they felt. But then footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, and they broke apart, the moment shattered, but not forgotten. "I'll search her chambers tomorrow morning," Ilara whispered. "When she takes her breakfast in the garden, as she always does. I'll find something, Thomas, I promise." The next day was the longest of Adrian's life. He went through the motions of his duties, hauling water and scrubbing pots, but his mind was entirely focused on Ilara. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, every hour like an eternity. He imagined a dozen scenarios where she was caught, where Seraphine discovered her searching, where everything went horribly wrong. His hands shook as he worked, and twice Chef Bernard snapped at him for his distraction. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the kitchen was in the chaos of dinner preparation, that Ilara found him. She looked pale but composed, and she pressed a small folded paper into his hand with a movement so subtle that no one else noticed. "The herb garden," she murmured. "After the dinner service." Adrian nodded, slipping the paper into his pocket. The rest of the evening crawled by with agonizing slowness. Finally, when the last dishes were cleared and the kitchen staff began to disperse, he made his way to the herb garden, a small enclosed space behind the kitchen that few people visited after dark. Ilara was already there, standing among the rosemary and thyme, moonlight silvering her hair. When she saw him, she moved closer, her voice urgent and low. "I found letters," she said without preamble, hidden in a locked drawer in her writing desk. "I had to pick the lock with a hairpin and my hands were shaking so badly I nearly broke it." She pulled several folded papers from inside her apron. "But Thomas, it's worse than we thought. So much worse." Adrian unfolded the first letter, tilting it to catch the moonlight. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, and the contents made his blood run cold. It was a detailed plan for his assassination, scheduled for 2 weeks after the wedding, during a hunting expedition that was already being organized. The method: poison on a blade that would appear to be a simple accident, an infection that would kill him slowly enough to avoid immediate suspicion. The letter was signed by Lord Blackthorne, one of the king's former advisors whom Adrian had always trusted. The second letter was even more damning. It outlined the political restructuring that would follow his death, how Seraphine would rule as regent, how certain noble houses would be rewarded for their cooperation and others would be systematically destroyed. It mentioned specific servants who were actually spies, members of the guard who were corrupt, and a network of conspiracy that reached into every corner of the palace. But it was the third letter that truly stunned him. It was older, dated from before his father's death, and it suggested that his father's sudden illness might not have been as natural as everyone had believed. The language was careful, coded, but the implication was clear. They had done this before. "They killed my father," Adrian whispered, the paper trembling in his hands. "They murdered the king, and now they plan to murder me." Ilara's hand found his shoulder. "Thomas, we have to take these letters to someone. The royal guard, the council. Someone who can stop this." Adrian looked at her, this brave, beautiful woman who had risked everything for a prince she didn't even know, and the weight of his deception crashed over him like a wave. She deserved to know who she was helping, who she had come to care for. She deserved the truth, even if it meant losing her forever. "Elara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." He took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. "My name isn't Thomas Blackwood. I'm not a gardener's nephew. I'm Crown Prince Adrian of Valmont." The silence that followed was deafening. Elara stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and then, slowly, understanding. She took a step back, her hand dropping from his shoulder, as if burned. "You're the prince," she said flatly. "The man they're planning to kill. You've been here disguised the entire time." Her voice rose slightly. "You've been lying to me about everything." "Not about everything," Adrian said desperately. "Not about the things that mattered. Elara, I came here to see the truth of this court, to understand what kind of woman I was meant to marry. I didn't plan to meet you. I didn't plan to—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I didn't plan to fall in love with you." Elara's eyes widened, and for a moment Adrian thought he saw something that might have been hope flicker across her face. But then it hardened, replaced by hurt and anger. "You fell in love with me? You, a prince engaged to be married, playing at being a servant? Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone. I risked my life for you today. And all of it was based on a lie." "It wasn't all a lie," Adrian insisted, moving toward her. "Yes, I deceived you about my identity, and I was wrong. I should have told you from the start, or as soon as things between us began to change. But everything I said to you, everything I felt, that was real. More real than anything I've experienced in my entire life." "How can I believe that?" Elara asked, her voice breaking. "How can I believe anything you say when you've proven yourself to be such an accomplished liar?" She wrapped her arms around herself as if cold. "You're the prince. I'm a kitchen maid. There's no world where this ends with anything but my heartbreak." "Then let me change the world," Adrian said, his own voice desperate now. "Let me break this engagement, expose these conspirators, and choose my own life. Elara, I don't care about your birth or your station. I care about your courage and your kindness, and the way you see beauty in simple things. I care about you." "You're going to marry Lady Seraphine in 3 weeks," Elara said, tears now streaming down her cheeks. "You have duties, responsibilities, a kingdom that needs you. And I'm no one. A cook with dreams of a bakery, and a heart that's stupid enough to have fallen for a man pretending to be someone he's not." The admission that she had fallen for him too should have brought Adrian joy, but instead it only deepened his anguish. Because she was right. He had duties, responsibilities, and breaking his engagement to the daughter of one of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom would create political chaos. But the alternative, marrying a woman who planned to murder him, living a lie for the rest of his potentially very short life, that was unthinkable. "I won't marry her," Adrian said with sudden certainty. "I can't. Even if there were no conspiracy, even if she were exactly what she pretends to be, I couldn't marry her now, because I've learned what love actually feels like, and it's not a political arrangement. It's this terrifying, wonderful feeling I have when I'm with you." "Your Highness," Elara said, and the formal address was like a knife between them, "you need to take these letters to your guard captain. You need to protect yourself and your kingdom. What you feel or don't feel for a kitchen maid is irrelevant compared to that." "Don't do that," Adrian pleaded. "Don't retreat behind walls of propriety and call me by my title. I'm still the man you laughed with in the kitchen, the man you taught to make bread, the man you risked everything to help. My rank doesn't change that." "It changes everything," Elara said softly. "You must see that. Even if you broke your engagement, even if you somehow survived the political fallout, you're still a prince and I'm still a servant. The court would never accept me. I would be a scandal, a stain on your reputation, a constant source of mockery and contempt. And you would grow to resent me for what marrying me would cost you." "You're wrong," Adrian said fiercely. "I could never resent you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "You've known me for a month," Elara countered, though her voice was gentler now. "A month of fantasy where you got to pretend to be someone else, and I got to believe in something impossible. But reality is waiting for us, Adrian. And reality says that princes don't marry kitchen maids, no matter how pretty the fairy tale sounds. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to find the words that would make her believe in the possibility of them. But the pain in her eyes stopped him, because he realized that his arguing was selfish. She was trying to protect herself from further heartbreak, and he had no right to take that away from her, not after all the ways he had already hurt her. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for lying to you, for putting you in danger, for making you care for someone who could only bring you pain. You deserved better than what I gave you." Elara wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders with visible effort. "Take the letters to your guard captain. Expose the conspiracy. Save yourself and your kingdom. That's what matters now." She started to turn away, then paused. "And Adrian? For what it's worth, I'm glad I met you, even if it hurts, even if it was all impossible from the start. I'm glad I got to know who you really are beneath the crown and the titles. He's a good man. He'll make a good king." Then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the garden, and Adrian was left alone with the letters that could save his life and the knowledge that in trying to find truth, he had destroyed the one genuine thing he had ever found. The next hours passed in a blur of action. Adrian went directly to Marcus, revealed his discoveries, and watched as his friend's face grew progressively grimmer. Together, they brought the letters to the Lord Chancellor, who summoned the council in an emergency midnight session. By dawn, Lady Seraphine and her co-conspirators were under arrest, the evidence of their treason undeniable in their own written words. The palace erupted in chaos. Nobles who had been loyal to Seraphine's faction scrambled to distance themselves. The engagement was formally dissolved, and Seraphine's father, the Duke of Wintermere, was stripped of his titles and lands for his role in the conspiracy. The investigation uncovered even more corruption, reaching into the treasury, the military, and the noble houses. It was a rot that had been growing for years, perhaps generations, and rooting it out would take time and tremendous political will. Through it all, Adrian played his role as Crown Prince, sitting in council meetings, making decisions, addressing the court with the authority that surprised even himself. He was praised for his cleverness in going undercover, his bravery in exposing the plot, his wisdom in gathering evidence before making accusations. He accepted the accolades with appropriate humility, but inside, he felt hollow. Because none of it mattered without Elara. He tried to see her several times, but she had requested a transfer to a different section of the palace, and when he finally tracked her down, she refused to speak with him privately. In the presence of other servants, she curtsied perfectly and called him "Your Highness," and acted as if they were strangers who had never shared bread and laughter and something that might have been love. It was Marcus who finally forced him to confront what he was doing. They were in Adrian's chambers 2 weeks after the arrests, and Adrian was staring at yet another document, requiring his attention without really seeing it. "You're miserable," Marcus said bluntly. "You saved the kingdom. You're being hailed as a hero, and you look like a man attending his own funeral." "I'm fine," Adrian lied. "You're in love with her," Marcus continued, ignoring the denial. "The kitchen maid, Elara. I've seen how you look when her name is mentioned, how you've been finding excuses to walk past wherever she's working. You're in love with her, and you're letting her go without a fight." "She doesn't want me," Adrian said tiredly. "She made that clear." "And even if she did, Marcus, how could it possibly work? I'm the Crown Prince. I need to make a marriage that strengthens the kingdom, that brings political advantage. I can't just marry a servant because I fell in love with her during a masquerade." "Can't you?" Marcus challenged. "You're the future king, Adrian. You make the rules. And after everything that just happened, after exposing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of nobility, do you really think the common people would object to their prince choosing a woman for love rather than political gain? If anything, it would make them adore you." "The nobility would never accept it," Adrian argued, but his resistance was weakening. "Some wouldn't," Marcus agreed. "But many would, and the ones who wouldn't are the same ones who are probably sympathetic to Seraphine's conspiracy anyway. Adrian, you've been given a rare gift, a chance to start over, to build the kind of kingdom you actually want to rule. Don't waste it by falling back into the same patterns that led to this mess in the first place." Adrian looked at his friend, his brother in all but blood, and felt something shift inside him. Marcus was right. He had spent his entire life accepting that his duty meant sacrificing his happiness. But where had that gotten him? Engaged to a woman who planned to murder him? Surrounded by nobles who valued power over honor? Ruling a kingdom where the worth of a person was determined by their birth rather than their character? What if he could change that? What if his reign could be the start of something different, something better? "She still might not want me," Adrian said quietly. "I hurt her. I lied to her. Why would she give me another chance?" "Then you grovel," Marcus said with a slight smile. "You apologize properly, you prove that you've changed, and you give her a reason to believe in you again. And if she still refuses, then at least you'll know you tried." Adrian stood, decision crystallizing in his mind. "I need to speak to the council." The emergency council session he called that afternoon would be talked about for years to come. Adrian stood before the assembled nobles and advisors, many of whom were still reeling from the recent upheaval, and made a declaration that shocked them all. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice strong and clear, "the recent conspiracy has shown us the rot that can grow when we value political advantage over honor, when we make decisions based on what serves our power rather than what serves our kingdom. My father chose Lady Seraphine as my bride because her family was powerful and the alliance seemed advantageous. We see now where that choice led." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I will not make the same mistake. When I marry, it will be to a woman of strong character and true heart, regardless of her birth or connections. And I am prepared to fight anyone in this room who believes that the worth of a person is determined by their bloodline rather than their actions." The council erupted in protests and arguments, exactly as Adrian had expected. Lord Pemberton, one of the older nobles, stood with indignation written across his face. "Your Highness, you cannot be suggesting that you would marry a commoner. The scandal alone would weaken the crown's authority." "Would it?" Adrian challenged. "Or would it show the people that their prince values the same qualities in a partner that they do? Love, loyalty, courage, kindness. When did those become less important than a family tree?" "This is about the kitchen maid, isn't it?" Lady Ashford, a distant cousin, said, with barely concealed disdain. "The one who found the letters. You've developed an infatuation with a servant girl." "I've fallen in love with a remarkable woman," Adrian corrected. "A woman who showed more bravery and honor in one day than most of us show in a lifetime. She risked her life to save mine, expecting nothing in return. She could have used her knowledge to blackmail me to gain favor or position, but she didn't. She simply did what was right, because it was right. How many people in this room can say the same?" The silence that followed was telling. Finally, the Lord Chancellor, an elderly man who had served Adrian's grandfather, spoke. "Your Highness, even if we were to accept this, even if the council approved such a match, there remains a practical problem. The young woman in question would have to agree to marry you. From what I understand, she has been avoiding you since your identity was revealed." "I know," Adrian admitted. "Which is why I need to prove to her that I'm worthy of a second chance. And I need to show her that loving me wouldn't mean sacrificing everything she is. I need to give her a reason to believe that we could build something real together." "And how do you propose to do that?" the Chancellor asked, though there was something like amusement in his old eyes. Adrian smiled. "I'm going to court her, properly this time, with honesty and intention. I'm going to show her that the man she fell in love with in the kitchen and the prince standing here are the same person. And I'm going to give her the choice that I took away before, the choice to accept or reject me with full knowledge of who I am and what I'm offering." "And if she rejects you?" Lady Ashford asked. "Then I'll respect her decision," Adrian said simply, "and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that I at least tried to choose love over duty, honesty over convenience. But I won't marry for political advantage again. The next woman I marry will be someone I choose with my whole heart, or I won't marry at all." The council session ended without a formal vote, but Adrian could sense the shift in the room. Some were horrified by his declaration, others intrigued, and a few, he thought, might actually be supportive. Lord Pemberton stormed out in fury, his face red with indignation, while several younger nobles remained behind to quietly express their support. The Lord Chancellor, ever pragmatic, simply nodded and said he would prepare the necessary documents should the courtship prove successful. It was enough for now. He had drawn his line in the sand, and now he needed to convince the only person whose opinion truly mattered. But drawing that line had consequences Adrian hadn't fully anticipated. The next morning, he woke to find the palace in an uproar. News of his declaration had spread through the court like wildfire, and opinions were sharply divided. Some servants were jubilant, whispering excitedly about the possibility of one of their own becoming queen. Others were terrified, worried that the upheaval would somehow cost them their positions or make their lives more difficult. The nobility was similarly split, with heated arguments breaking out in corridors and drawing rooms about the future of the kingdom. Adrian's uncle, Duke Reinhardt, requested an urgent meeting. The Duke was his father's younger brother, a man who had always been supportive of Adrian, but who also understood the delicate balance of power that kept the kingdom stable. When Adrian entered the Duke's private study, he found his uncle standing by the window, his expression grave. "You've started something you may not be able to control," Reinhardt said without preamble. "The traditionalists are calling for an emergency council to declare you unfit to rule. They're saying you've been bewitched, that your judgment has been compromised." "And what do you think?" Adrian asked, meeting his uncle's gaze steadily. Reinhardt turned from the window, studying his nephew with eyes that had seen decades of court politics. "I think you're either the bravest fool I've ever known, or the wisest king this realm has seen in generations. Possibly both." He moved to his desk, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Your father would have been furious. He believed in duty above all else, in sacrificing personal happiness for political advantage. And look where that got him," Adrian said quietly, "murdered by the very alliance he thought would strengthen the kingdom." "Touché." Reinhardt handed him a glass. "But Adrian, you must understand what you're risking. If you marry this woman, you'll alienate at least half the noble houses. Your children's claim to the throne will be questioned. Every decision you make will be scrutinized through the lens of your controversial marriage." "I know," Adrian said. "But uncle, I've seen what happens when we value political convenience over genuine connection. Seraphine would have made a perfect political match, and she was planning to murder me. The system is broken. Maybe it's time someone broke it further, intentionally this time, and rebuilt it into something better." Reinhardt sipped his wine thoughtfully. "You sound like your grandfather. He had similar ideals, you know, wanted to reform the nobility, give more power to the common councils. Your father talked him out of it, convinced him that stability required maintaining the traditional order." He set down his glass. "Perhaps your father was wrong. Perhaps the only way to save this kingdom is to transform it so completely that the old corruption can't take root again." "Then you'll support me?" Adrian asked, surprised. "I'll do more than that," Reinhardt said. "I'll help you navigate the political waters. You'll need allies, Adrian, powerful ones who can counter the traditionalists, and you'll need to move quickly before they can organize effective opposition." He pulled out a leather journal, flipping through pages covered in his meticulous handwriting. "There are 7 houses that are wavering, influential families who could go either way. If we can secure their support, the traditionalists won't have enough power to challenge your authority." They spent the next several hours strategizing, identifying potential allies, and discussing how to frame Adrian's choice in terms that would appeal to different factions. Some nobles would respond to arguments about love and honor, others to practical considerations about public opinion and the loyalty of the common people. It was exhausting work, reducing something as pure as his feelings for Elara to political calculations, but Adrian understood it was necessary. Meanwhile, Elara was facing her own challenges. Word had spread through the servants' quarters about the prince's interest, and reactions ranged from supportive to hostile. Some of the other maids congratulated her, thrilled that one of their own might rise to such heights. But others accused her of using her position to seduce the prince, of being ambitious and calculating. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Pembroke, called her into her office for a stern conversation. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Mrs. Pembroke said, her face pinched with disapproval, "but you're causing quite a disturbance. The nobility is in an uproar, and it's affecting the entire household." "I didn't ask for any of this," Elara replied quietly. I was simply doing my work when Prince Adrian sought me out. Nevertheless, you should have refused his attention, Mrs. Pembroke insisted. You should have known your place and discouraged him immediately. Instead, you've allowed this fantasy to continue, and now the entire palace is suffering for it. Ilara felt anger stir in her chest, but she kept her voice level. With respect, Mrs. Pembroke, I don't believe love should be dictated by station. If the prince believes I'm worthy of his attention, who am I to tell him he's wrong? Love, Mrs. Pembroke scoffed. Princes don't love kitchen maids, girl. They dally with them, perhaps, but they don't marry them. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak, and worse, you're giving false hope to every servant in this palace who now thinks they can aspire above their station. Maybe they should aspire, Ilara said, surprising herself with her boldness. Maybe the problem is that we've all accepted a system that says some people matter more than others, based solely on the circumstances of their birth. Maybe it's time that changed. Mrs. Pembroke's expression hardened. You're dismissed from this conversation, but mark my words, girl, this won't end well for you, it never does. Ilara left the office shaken but determined. She had never been one to back down from challenges, and she wasn't about to start now. But the encounter reminded her of just how difficult the path ahead would be. If even the servants' quarters were divided over her potential elevation, what hope did she have of winning over the nobility? That evening, she sought refuge in the palace library, a place she had discovered during her first weeks at the palace. It was quiet and rarely occupied by anyone but the elderly royal librarian, Master Cornelius, who had shown her unexpected kindness from the start. She found him cataloguing books in the history section, his white beard nearly reaching his chest as he bent over his work. "Ah, Miss Wynne," he said, looking up with a warm smile. "I wondered if you might appear tonight. I imagine you're seeking some peace from all the commotion." "Is it that obvious?" Ilara asked, sinking into one of the comfortable chairs near the fire. "My dear, the entire palace is talking about nothing else." Cornelius set down his books and joined her by the fire. "Though I must say, I find the whole affair rather exciting. It's been decades since anything truly interesting happened in this stuffy old court." Despite her worries, Ilara smiled. "You're probably the only person in the palace who thinks so." "Not quite," Cornelius said, his eyes twinkling. "There are more supporters than you might think. They're simply quieter about it." He pulled a book from a nearby shelf. "Did you know that 300 years ago King Edmund the Wise married a merchant's daughter? It caused quite a scandal at the time, but she proved to be one of our greatest queens, reformed the treasury, established trade routes that made the kingdom prosperous, and was beloved by the people." Ilara took the book, looking at the portrait of Queen Margareta on the cover. The woman looked strong and confident, nothing like the delicate nobility Ilara had observed in the palace. What happened to her? She ruled for 40 years alongside her husband, and when he died she served as regent for their son until he came of age. The reforms she instituted lasted for generations. Cornelius leaned back in his chair. "The point, my dear, is that unconventional marriages are not unprecedented in our history. They're simply rare, and when they work, they can change everything for the better." "And when they don't work?" Ilara asked quietly. "Then at least someone had the courage to try," Cornelius replied. "But I don't think you need to worry about that. I've observed Prince Adrian for years, watched him grow from a boy into a man. I've never seen him happier or more purposeful than he's been these past weeks. Whatever else this is, it's genuine." Ilara clutched the book, drawing comfort from its weight. "I'm terrified, Master Cornelius. I'm terrified of failing, of not being what a queen should be, of letting Adrian down or causing damage to the kingdom. I'm just a cook. What do I know about ruling?" "You know about hard work," Cornelius said. "You know about creating something from nothing, about nourishing others, about taking raw ingredients and transforming them into something wonderful. Those are not bad metaphors for governance, my dear. And as for the rest, well, that's what advisors and tutors are for. No one is born knowing how to rule. Even princes must learn." His words eased something in Ilara's chest. She stayed in the library for several more hours, reading about Queen Margareta and other historical figures who had defied expectations. When she finally returned to her quarters, she felt stronger, more certain that perhaps this impossible thing might actually be possible after all. Finding Ilara proved more difficult than exposing a conspiracy. She had become adept at avoiding him, always managing to be somewhere else when he approached, always surrounded by other servants who made private conversation impossible. Adrian understood why she was protecting herself, but it didn't make the distance any less painful. He caught glimpses of her in corridors, saw her working in the kitchen through doorways, but every time he tried to approach, she vanished like morning mist. Marcus watched his friend's frustration with sympathy. "You need a different strategy," he said one evening as they stood on one of the palace balconies. "She's avoiding the places she knows you'll be, so go where she doesn't expect you." "Like where?" Adrian asked, desperate enough to consider anything. "The herb garden behind the kitchen. She goes there every morning before dawn to cut fresh herbs for the day's cooking. I've seen her there when I'm doing my morning rounds." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Tomorrow morning, be there waiting. She can't avoid you if you're already there." So the next morning, well before sunrise, Adrian positioned himself in the herb garden. The air was cool and damp, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. He waited among the rosemary and sage, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What if she refused to listen? What if his words weren't enough to bridge the gap his deception had created? He heard her footsteps before he saw her, the soft sound of boots on the stone path. Then she appeared, carrying a basket and wearing a simple grey dress, her hair in its customary braid. She stopped short when she saw him, her hand tightening on the basket handle. "Your Highness," she said formally, and the title was like a wall between them. "You shouldn't be here. It's not proper." "Nothing about us has ever been proper," Adrian said, stepping forward. "Ilara, please, just give me a chance to explain, to apologize properly. I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust. But I need you to understand why I did what I did, and more importantly, I need you to know that everything I felt, everything between us, that was real." Ilara looked at him for a long moment, conflict clear in her expression. Then she sighed and set down her basket. "You have until the sun clears the eastern wall," she said. "Then I have to start the morning bread." It wasn't much time, but it was more than Adrian had dared hope for. He took a breath and began, telling her everything. He spoke of the suffocation he had felt in his princely role, the emptiness of his engagement to Seraphine, the desperate need to see his world through different eyes. He described the moment he first saw her in the kitchen, how something had shifted in his chest, how her genuine kindness and quiet strength had captivated him from the start. "I should have told you the truth sooner," he admitted. "I know that. Every day I didn't tell you was another lie, another betrayal. But Ilara, I was terrified. Terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd treat me differently, that you'd become careful and deferential instead of honest and real. And I needed that honesty like I needed air. For the first time in my life, someone was seeing me, the actual me, not the crown or the title or the political chess piece, just me." "But it wasn't really you," Ilara said softly. "It was Thomas Blackwood, a fiction you created." "No," Adrian said firmly. "Thomas Blackwood was me, maybe more truly me than I've ever been before. He was who I would have been if I'd been born without the weight of a crown, but he was still me. My thoughts, my feelings, my values. The only lies were the external details. Everything else was the truth of who I am inside." Ilara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Do you have any idea how confused I am? How much it hurts to reconcile the man I fell for in the kitchen with the prince standing before me now? They feel like two different people, even though you're saying they're the same." "Then let me prove it to you," Adrian said, moving closer. "Let me court you properly as myself, and show you that the man you're afraid has disappeared is still here. He's just finally able to be honest about all of who he is." "Adrian," Ilara whispered, and hearing his name from her lips sent warmth through his entire body. "Even if I believed that, even if I could forgive the deception, we still have all the practical problems. I don't know how to be what you need me to be." "You already are what I need you to be," Adrian insisted. "Strong, kind, honest, brave. Those are the qualities I need in a partner, not skills in court etiquette or knowledge of political maneuvering. Those things can be learned. But character, integrity, the kind of goodness you have, that can't be taught. It's who you are." The sun was creeping higher, golden light beginning to spill over the eastern wall. Their time was running out. Adrian made a decision, one that was probably reckless, but felt absolutely right. He pulled a small velvet pouch from his pocket and opened it, revealing his mother's ring, a delicate band of silver with a single pearl. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly, seeing Ilara's eyes widen. "Not yet. But I want you to keep this as a promise that I will spend however long it takes proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust again. A promise that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm not giving up on us, even if you need time to believe again." He placed the pouch in her hand, closing her fingers around it. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." Ilara looked down at the pouch, then back up at him, and Adrian saw something shift in her expression. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to process everything. Time to see if you really mean what you're saying." "Take all the time you need," Adrian said, though his heart ached at the thought of continued separation. "Just please don't shut me out completely. Let me prove myself through actions, not just words." Ilara nodded slowly. "I won't avoid you anymore. But Adrian, I need you to understand something. If we try this, if I let myself hope again, and it doesn't work, if the reality proves too difficult, or you decide I'm not worth the political cost, I don't think I'll recover from it. So before you make any more promises, be absolutely certain that you're willing to see this through, no matter how hard it gets." "I'm certain," Adrian said without hesitation. "More certain than I've ever been about anything." The sun had cleared the wall now, bathing the garden in morning light. Ilara picked up her basket and began moving among the herbs, cutting sprigs with practiced efficiency. Adrian watched her work, memorizing every detail, the concentration on her face, the gentle way she touched each plant, the morning light turning her hair to burnished copper. "I should go," he said finally, reluctantly. "But Ilara, thank you, for listening, for giving me a chance to explain, for not giving up on us entirely." She looked up from her work, and for the first time since his identity was revealed, she gave him a small, genuine smile. "I haven't given up," she said softly. "I'm just being cautious. There's a difference." That smile sustained Adrian through the difficult days that followed. True to her word, Ilara no longer actively avoided him, but she maintained a careful distance, watching and evaluating. Adrian threw himself into proving his sincerity, not just to Ilara but to everyone who doubted him. He spent his mornings in council meetings, implementing reforms that would address the corruption exposed by Seraphine's conspiracy. He met with representatives from the common people, listening to their concerns and working to address them. He visited the servants' quarters, speaking with staff members and learning about their working conditions, their families, their dreams. Some were suspicious of his sudden interest, but others opened up, and Adrian began to see even more clearly the vast gulf between the life he had always known and the reality most of his subjects experienced. In the afternoons, he could often be found in the library with Master Cornelius, studying the histories of past rulers who had attempted social reforms. He learned about their successes and failures, the strategies that had worked, and the mistakes that had led to disaster. He began to develop a comprehensive vision for what his reign could be, a kingdom where merit mattered more than birth, where justice was truly blind to social status, where every person had the opportunity to rise as far as their talents and efforts could take them. And in the evenings he found reasons to be near the kitchens, never intrusive, never demanding Ilara's attention, but simply present. Sometimes they would talk briefly about inconsequential things, the weather, a particularly difficult pastry she was attempting, a new policy he was considering. Other times they simply worked in companionable silence, Adrian helping with simple tasks, while Ilara prepared the next day's bread. Slowly, incrementally, the wall between them began to lower. Ilara asked questions about his childhood, about what it was like to grow up as a prince, and Adrian answered honestly, holding nothing back. He told her about the loneliness of his position, the weight of expectations, the way every relationship he had was colored by his rank. He admitted his fears about being king, about making mistakes that would harm his people, about becoming the kind of ruler his father had been, good-intentioned but ultimately blind to the real needs of the kingdom. In turn, Ilara shared more about her own life. She spoke of her parents, barely remembered shadows who had died when she was 3. She described her grandmother in greater detail, a woman of fierce independence and practical wisdom who had taught her that a person's worth came from their actions, not their circumstances. She admitted her own fears, that she wasn't educated enough, refined enough, strong enough to be what a queen needed to be. "Education can be acquired," Adrian told her one evening as they worked together preparing vegetables for the next day's soup. "Refinement is just learning a set of arbitrary rules, and you're more than capable of learning rules. But strength? Ilara, you're the strongest person I know. You survived losing everyone you loved, built a skill that brings joy to others, risked your life to stop a conspiracy, and you're standing here now willing to consider a future that terrifies you. That's not weakness, that's extraordinary courage." "I don't feel courageous," Ilara admitted, carefully slicing carrots. "I feel like I'm barely holding myself together, constantly terrified that I'll do something wrong and prove everyone right who says I'm not good enough for this." Adrian set down his knife and turned to face her. "Can I tell you a secret? I feel exactly the same way. Every day I'm terrified that I'll make the wrong decision, that I'll let people down, that I'll prove myself unworthy of the trust my people place in me. The only difference is that I was born into a role that demands I pretend to be confident, even when I'm not. But Ilara, no one actually has all the answers. We're all just doing our best and hoping it's enough." Ilara looked up at him, surprise and something like relief in her eyes. "You're afraid too?" "Constantly," Adrian admitted. "Especially now, when I'm trying to change systems that have been in place for centuries. I lie awake at night worrying about whether I'm helping or just causing chaos. But then I think about the alternative, continuing the way things were, accepting corruption and injustice as inevitable. And I realize that being afraid doesn't mean I'm wrong. Sometimes being afraid just means you understand the stakes." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared vulnerability. They were both facing impossible challenges, both terrified of failing, both hoping they were strong enough for what lay ahead. And perhaps that commonality, that shared fear and determination, was a better foundation for a partnership than perfect confidence would have been. The weeks passed and the court began to notice the careful dance between their prince and the kitchen maid. Some watched with approval, charmed by what they saw as a genuine romance. Others observed with calculation, trying to determine how they could use the situation to their advantage. And still others looked on with disapproval, convinced that the entire affair would end in disaster. Duke Reinhardt proved invaluable during this time, skillfully managing the political complexities, while Adrian focused on proving himself to Ilara. The Duke met with wavering nobles, presenting carefully crafted arguments about why supporting Adrian's choice would ultimately serve their interests. He pointed out that the common people were overwhelmingly in favor of the match, and that opposing it might make them appear heartless and out of touch. He reminded them of the prosperity that Queen Margareta had brought 3 centuries earlier, and suggested that perhaps it was time for another unconventional queen to revitalize the kingdom. Slowly, support began to build. The younger nobles, many of whom chafed under the restrictions of arranged marriages themselves, were particularly enthusiastic. Several came to Adrian privately to express their admiration for his courage and to offer their backing. A few even admitted that his example had inspired them to reconsider their own relationships, to seek genuine connection rather than merely advantageous alliances. But there was also organized opposition. Lord Pemberton had gathered a faction of traditionalist nobles who were determined to prevent what they saw as the degradation of the monarchy. They began circulating petitions, calling for Adrian to be declared unfit to rule on grounds of impaired judgment. They argued that any prince who would consider marrying so far beneath his station was clearly not thinking clearly and needed to be placed under a regency until he came to his senses. The crisis came to a head 6 weeks after Adrian's declaration to the council. Pemberton's faction formally presented their petition, backed by enough noble signatures to require a full council hearing. Adrian would have to defend his position publicly, and the outcome would determine not just his relationship with Ilara, but the very nature of his authority as future king. The night before the hearing, Adrian couldn't sleep. He paced his chambers, reviewing his arguments, anticipating objections, preparing for every contingency. Near midnight, Marcus found him still awake, staring at documents by candlelight. "You need to rest," Marcus said. "You'll be no good tomorrow if you're exhausted." "I can't stop thinking about what's at stake," Adrian admitted. "If I lose tomorrow, it's not just my happiness on the line. It's everything I've been trying to build, all the reforms, all the changes. If the council declares me unfit, they'll install a regent who will undo everything." "You won't lose," Marcus said with certainty. "You have truth on your side, and you have the love of the people. That's more powerful than Pemberton's faction realizes." "I hope you're right," Adrian said. "Because if I'm forced to give up Ilara, if I have to watch her walk away knowing I couldn't protect what we have, I don't know how I'll bear it." Marcus gripped his friend's shoulder. "Then don't think about losing. Think about winning. Think about the kingdom you're going to build with her at your side. That's worth fighting for." The council chamber was packed the next morning. Every noble who could claim the right to attend was present, and the gallery was filled with curious onlookers who had managed to secure entry. Hadrian stood before them in full royal regalia, looking every inch the prince, but inside he felt like Thomas Blackwood again, a man hoping his character would be enough to win the day. Lord Pemberton presented his case first, and it was more damning than Adrian had expected. He didn't just argue that marrying a commoner was inappropriate. He systematically attacked Ilara's character, suggesting she had manipulated Adrian, perhaps even used magic or potions to enchant him. He questioned her morals, her intelligence, her fitness to be anywhere near the throne, and he concluded by demanding that Adrian be placed under temporary regency until he could be freed from whatever spell had clouded his judgment. Adrian felt rage building as he listened to Ilara being maligned by a man who had never even met her, but he forced himself to remain calm, to wait for his turn to speak. When Pemberton finally finished and returned to his seat with a satisfied smile, Adrian stepped forward. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber, "Lord Pemberton has painted a picture of me as a besotted fool, incapable of reason or judgment. Let me address that directly. I am neither besotted nor a fool. I am a prince who has seen the rot in our current system and who has chosen to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Lord Pemberton seems to have forgotten that it was my impaired judgment that uncovered and stopped a conspiracy to murder me and usurp the throne. Was I lacking judgment when I went under cover to see the truth of this court? Was I foolish when I gathered evidence against my own fiancée and her co-conspirators? Or was I perhaps showing exactly the kind of initiative and clear thinking that a good ruler needs?" Several nobles nodded, and Adrian felt a surge of hope. "As for Miss Wynne, let me tell you who she really is, not the caricature Lord Pemberton has painted. She is a woman who lost her parents as a child and was raised by her grandmother in poverty, yet emerged from that hardship with grace and skill. She is a master of her craft, creating food that brings joy to everyone who tastes it. She is brave enough to risk her life searching the chambers of a treasonous noble to gather evidence that would save her prince. She is kind to everyone she meets, regardless of their station. She is intelligent, thoughtful, and possesses more natural dignity than most of the nobility I've encountered." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of those who would judge him. "But beyond all of that, she is the woman I love. Not because she enchanted me or manipulated me, but because she saw me truly when I was in disguise and treated me with genuine kindness. Because she challenged me to be better, to think more deeply, to question assumptions I'd always taken for granted. And because when I'm with her, I feel like the best version of myself, like the kind of man and king I want to be." "Love is all well and good," Pemberton interjected, "but it's not sufficient grounds for a royal marriage. The crown has responsibilities that supersede personal feelings." "You're right," Adrian said, surprising everyone, including Pemberton. "The crown does have responsibilities. The responsibility to serve the people, to ensure justice, to create a kingdom where every subject can thrive. And I would argue that marrying a woman of the people, someone who understands their struggles and dreams, someone who can help me see the kingdom through their eyes, that serves those responsibilities far better than marrying another noble who is so removed from common life that she sees servants as invisible. He turned to address the full council. 300 years ago, King Edmund the Wise married a merchant's daughter, and she became one of our greatest queens. Her reforms brought prosperity that lasted for generations. She could do that precisely because she understood both worlds, the world of commerce and common people, and the world of nobility and governance. That's what I'm proposing. Not a degradation of the crown, but a strengthening of it through connection to the very people we're meant to serve. The chamber erupted in discussion, nobles arguing amongst themselves. The Lord Chancellor called for order, then looked at Adrian thoughtfully. Your Highness, you make compelling points, but Lord Pemberton's concern about precedent is not entirely without merit. If you marry a commoner, what prevents every noble in the kingdom from doing the same? What happens to the alliance system that has kept our peace for centuries? Perhaps it's time for a new system, Adrian said, one based on shared values and genuine partnership rather than forced alliances. My lords and ladies, look at what the old system brought us. It brought us Lady Seraphine, perfect on paper, murderous in reality. It brought us a court riddled with corruption, because everyone was more concerned with maintaining their power and position than with actually serving the kingdom. He gestured broadly. I'm proposing that we value character over bloodlines, merit over inheritance, genuine connection over political convenience. Will it be chaotic at first? Probably. Will there be adjustments and difficulties? Certainly. But I believe the kingdom that emerges from those difficulties will be stronger, more just and more prosperous than what we have now. Duke Reinhardt stood, and the chamber quieted to hear what the king's brother would say. I have watched my nephew carefully these past weeks, Reinhardt said. I have seen him work tirelessly to root out corruption, to listen to the needs of common people, to educate himself about governance in ways his tutors never taught him. I have seen him demonstrate more wisdom and genuine concern for this kingdom than I saw in many years of my brother's reign. Rest his soul. He looked directly at Pemberton. My brother chose Adrian's previous fiancée based on all the traditional criteria. She was noble, educated, politically connected and beautiful, and she was planning to murder him. Perhaps it's time we admitted that the traditional criteria are insufficient. Another noble stood, Lady Ashford, who had been one of the earlier critics. Your Highness, she said, her tone less hostile than before, if we were to support this match, what assurances can you give us that Miss Wynne is prepared for the responsibilities of queenship? I can assure you that she will have the finest tutors, the best preparation and my complete support, Adrian said. But more than that, I can tell you that she already possesses the most important qualities for queenship. She cares deeply about people. She understands hard work and sacrifice. She has proven her courage and integrity. The etiquette and protocol can be learned, my lady, but those essential qualities, those must be inherent, and they are. And if we demand to meet her, Lady Ashford pressed, to see for ourselves whether she possesses these qualities you claim. Adrian hesitated only briefly. He hadn't discussed this possibility with Elara, hadn't prepared her for the possibility of being summoned before the council, but he also knew that transparency was essential. I will ask her if she's willing, he said, but I will not force her to appear before this council to be judged like a prisoner on trial. If she agrees to come, it will be as my honored guest and potential future queen, treated with the respect those positions deserve. The Lord Chancellor considered this, then nodded. That seems fair. This council will recess until tomorrow morning. Your Highness, please ask Miss Wynne if she would be willing to address us. If she agrees, we will hear her. If not, we will make our decision based on what we've heard today. As the council dispersed, Adrian felt both relief and apprehension. He had made his case as well as he could, and some minds had clearly been changed, but now everything depended on Elara, on whether she was willing to face the scrutiny of the entire noble class and defend herself against their judgment. He found her in the kitchens, where she had been waiting anxiously throughout the hearing. One look at his face, and she knew something significant had happened. They want to meet me, she said, not a question but a statement. Finally, he did something that no prince had probably ever done. He waited in the kitchen at dawn, before even the earliest servants arrived, and when Elara walked in to begin the morning bread, He was sitting at the work table where they had spent so many evenings talking. She froze when she saw him, her hand still on the door handle, clearly debating whether to turn around and leave, but then her shoulders straightened with that quiet dignity he had come to love, and she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Your Highness," she said formally, "you shouldn't be here. If someone sees you in the kitchen at this hour, with me, it will cause talk." "I don't care about talk," Adrian said, standing. "Ilara, please, I just need you to listen. 5 minutes, and then if you want me to leave and never approach you again, I will." She hesitated, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Adrian had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind, had prepared elegant speeches about love and duty and the courage to change the world. But standing there, faced with the reality of her guarded expression and the hurt still visible in her eyes, all his prepared words fled. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm sorry for lying to you, for deceiving you about who I was. I'm sorry for making you care for someone you thought was your equal when I was hiding behind a disguise. And I'm sorry for being so caught up in my own feelings that I didn't consider how much my deception would hurt you when the truth came out." Ilara's expression softened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting. "When I started this masquerade," Adrian continued, "I told myself it was about seeing the truth of my court, about understanding my fiancé without the performance of courtly life. And that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I think I was also running away, trying to escape a life that felt like a cage, trying to be someone other than the prince who had to sacrifice everything for duty." He took a breath. "And then I met you, and you showed me that the problem wasn't being a prince. The problem was being the wrong kind of prince, ruling the wrong kind of kingdom." "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You treated everyone with the same kindness, regardless of their station," Adrian said. "You found joy in simple work well done. You dreamed of creating something beautiful and nourishing, not for glory or wealth, but because it would make people happy. You showed me what it means to live with integrity, to value people for who they are rather than what they can do for you. And that's the kind of king I want to be, Ilara. I want to rule a kingdom where your worth isn't determined by your birth, where your dreams matter as much as any noble's ambitions." Tears glistened in Ilara's eyes. "That's a beautiful vision, Adrian, but it doesn't change the reality of who we are. You're still a prince, and I'm still a kitchen maid." "You're wrong," Adrian said, moving closer. "You're not just a kitchen maid, you're Ilara Wynn, the woman who raised herself to honor her grandmother's memory. You're the cook whose pastries bring joy to everyone who tastes them. You're the brave soul who risked her life to stop a conspiracy. You're the person who saw Thomas Blackwood, a servant, and treated him with the same kindness and respect you would have shown a prince. That's who you are, and your worth has nothing to do with where you were born." "Even if I believed that," Ilara said, her voice breaking slightly, "even if I accepted that I could be more than what the world says I am, how would this work? How would we work? The court would despise me. The nobles would see me as an upstart, a commoner who seduced their prince. I would be a target for every conspiracy, every plot, every ambitious family that wanted to remove the obstacle to their own plans. You would be my queen," Adrian said firmly. "You would have my protection, my devotion, and the love of the common people who would see you as one of their own raised to the highest position in the land. Would it be difficult? Yes. Would there be opposition? Absolutely. But Ilara, I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, what was easy and politically convenient. For once, just once, I want to fight for something that matters. I want to fight for us." "You say that now," Ilara said, though Adrian could hear the hope creeping into her voice despite her resistance. "But what about in 5 years or 10, when the reality of what marrying me has cost you becomes clear? When you're dealing with the political fallout, when you're facing opposition from houses that would have been allies if you'd made a more advantageous match, will you still feel the same, or will you resent me for what you gave up?" Adrian closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Ilara, look at what my advantageous match brought me. A fiancé who planned to murder me, a court riddled with conspiracy and corruption, a life that felt like a beautiful prison. You didn't cost me anything. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You showed me that there's another way to live, another way to rule. How could I ever resent you for that? I'm scared, Elara admitted, and the vulnerability in her voice made Adrian's heart ache. I'm scared of hoping for something impossible and having my heart broken when reality intrudes. So I'm scared of failing you, of not being what a queen should be. I'm scared that one day you'll look at me and see a mistake instead of the woman you love. Then let me be scared with you, Adrian said, squeezing her hands gently. Let's be terrified together and face whatever comes as partners. Because here's what I know, Elara. In all my life, I've never felt more myself than when I was with you. I've never laughed more, or thought more deeply about what matters, or felt more hopeful about the future. You make me want to be a better man and a better king, and yes, choosing you means choosing a harder path, but it also means choosing an honest path, a real path, a path that I believe will make me and this kingdom stronger in ways that political marriages never could. Elara searched his face, her green eyes swimming with tears. If I say yes, she whispered, if I agree to try this, you have to promise me something. Anything, Adrian said immediately. Promise me that if it becomes too much, if the political cost becomes too high, if choosing me means putting the kingdom at risk, you'll tell me the truth. You'll give me the chance to step aside before everything falls apart. Promise me you won't sacrifice the kingdom for me, even if you think that's what love requires. Adrian wanted to protest, wanted to say that he would never let her go regardless of the cost. But he understood what she was asking for, the kind of love that was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice if necessary, and he respected her too much to promise something he couldn't guarantee. I promise that I will always be honest with you, he said instead, that we will face every challenge together and make every difficult decision together. And I promise that I will fight with everything I have to build a kingdom where we don't have to choose between love and duty, where those two things can finally align. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. But most of all, I promise that no matter what comes, you will never doubt that choosing you was the best decision I ever made. For a long moment, Elara simply looked at him, and Adrian held his breath, waiting for her answer. Then slowly she smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that he had fallen in love with in this very kitchen. You're completely mad, she said softly. This is going to be a disaster. Probably, Adrian agreed, hope surging through his chest. The court is going to hate me. Many of them will, Adrian admitted, but many will also admire your courage, your intelligence, and your compassion, and those are the ones worth knowing anyway. I don't know how to be a queen, Elara said, but there was less resistance in her voice now. I'll teach you, Adrian promised, and you'll teach me how to be a king worth serving. We'll figure it out together. Elara took a shaky breath, then nodded. Then I suppose we should start by doing this properly. Your Highness, she said, a hint of teasing entering her voice even as tears rolled down her cheeks. Are you asking me to court you with the intention of marriage? Yes, Adrian said, his own eyes stinging with emotion. Elara Wynn, will you allow me the extraordinary honor of courting you, of learning everything there is to know about you, of proving that I am worthy of your trust and your love? And someday, when you're ready, when you believe in us as much as I do, will you consider becoming my wife and my queen? Yes, Elara whispered. Yes to all of it. God help us both, but yes. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest as he held her close. They stood like that for a long moment, two people from different worlds who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, choosing to believe in something that everyone else said was impossible. We're going to scandalize the entire kingdom, Elara murmured against his shirt. Good, Adrian said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It's time this kingdom learned that love matters more than bloodlines, and that courage can come from anywhere, even from a kitchen maid with flour on her hands and dreams of her own bakery. Elara pulled back slightly, looking up at him with surprise. You remembered that? I remember everything you've told me, Adrian said. And Elara, about that bakery. What if you didn't have to wait to own your own? What if you could have Wynns right now, a place where you could create freely and teach others your craft? Adrian, I can't accept— It's not charity, he interrupted gently. It's an investment in the kingdom's future queen learning to manage her own enterprise, understanding commerce and the needs of common people. Every queen should have interests beyond the court. And besides, I'm selfish enough to want to make sure that your dream comes true, that you never have cause to regret choosing me over the simpler life you could have had. Ilara laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You really are determined to make this work, aren't you? With every fiber of my being, Adrian confirmed. Now I should probably leave before the other servants arrive and find their prince in the kitchen, embracing their newest cook. Though I suppose we'll have to get used to causing talk. Wait, Ilara said as he started to pull away. She reached up, cupping his face with her hands, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I wanted to do that at least once before we have to become proper and follow all the rules of courtship. Who says we have to follow all the rules? Adrian asked, stealing another quick kiss. We're already breaking the biggest one. We might as well enjoy the smaller rebellions too. The next weeks were unlike anything the court of Valmont had ever seen. Crown Prince Adrian began openly courting Ilara Wynne, and while the scandal was every bit as intense as predicted, something unexpected happened. The common people loved it. Stories spread through the capital of the prince who had gone undercover to learn about his people, who had fallen in love with a kitchen maid, and who had chosen his heart over political convenience. Ballads were composed, children played at being brave kitchen maids and disguised princes, and public opinion swung heavily in favor of the romance. The nobility was more divided. The older, more traditional houses were appalled and made their disapproval known. But the younger nobles, and those who had chafed under the corruption of the previous regime, saw Adrian's choice as refreshingly honest. Some began to question their own arranged marriages. Others started paying more attention to the character of potential spouses rather than just their connections. It was a small revolution, but it was beginning. Ilara handled the transition with more grace than anyone could have expected. Adrian arranged for her to have tutors in protocol, politics, history, and all the subjects a future queen would need. But he insisted that she also continue her work in the kitchen, that she maintain her connection to the life she had known. He didn't want her to become someone she wasn't. He wanted the court to accept her as she was. True to his word, Adrian also helped her open Wynne's, a small bakery in the heart of the capital. It became an instant success, with people lining up for the chance to buy bread and pastries from the woman who had captured the prince's heart. Ilara used the profits to fund a cooking school for orphans and poor children, teaching them a trade that could lift them from poverty. It was exactly the kind of queen she would be, compassionate and practical, invested in the real welfare of the people. 3 months after their courtship began, on a spring morning when the palace gardens were in full bloom, Adrian took Ilara to a small gazebo overlooking the city. They had spent the morning walking and talking, as they often did, discussing everything from his latest policy debates to her newest recipe experiments. The ease between them had only grown with time, the foundation they had built in those early days in the kitchen proving stronger than any storm of public opinion. Ilara, Adrian said, taking her hands as they stood in the gazebo with the city spread out below them. 3 months ago, I asked if I could court you. Today, I'm asking something more. He knelt before her, pulling out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple band of gold with a single perfect sapphire. Ilara Wynne, you have shown me what it means to live with integrity, to love without condition, and to dream of a better world while working every day to create it. You've made me a better man and will make me a better king. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my queen, and my partner in building the kind of kingdom we both believe in? Ilara looked down at him, tears streaming freely down her face, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then she knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. Adrian, from the moment I met you in that kitchen, even when I knew you only as Thomas, I felt like I had found something I didn't know I was searching for. You've given me dreams I never dared to have, and more than that, you've shown me that those dreams can be real. So yes, with my whole heart, yes, I will marry you. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that spoke of all the hope and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing through their tears, Ilara looked at the ring on her hand and shook her head in wonder. "From kitchen maid to queen," she murmured. "If someone had told me this story a year ago, I would have called them mad." "The best stories usually sound mad," Adrian said, wrapping his arms around her. "That's how you know they're worth telling." The royal wedding that took place 2 months later was unlike any in the kingdom's history. By Adrian's decree, it was opened to the common people, with spaces reserved in the cathedral for servants, tradespeople, and ordinary citizens alongside the nobility. Ilara wore a gown that was beautiful, but not ostentatious, elegant but approachable, and she had insisted on incorporating elements that honored her grandmother's memory and her own journey from that small cottage to the palace. When she walked down the aisle, there wasn't a single person present who didn't feel the significance of the moment. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement about what kind of kingdom Valmont would become under Adrian's rule. A kingdom where worth was measured by character rather than birth, where love mattered more than political advantage, where even a kitchen maid could become a queen if she had the courage and strength to seize her destiny. Adrian stood at the altar, watching Ilara approach, and felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced before. This was right. This was what his father's death, Seraphine's conspiracy, and his own desperate need to understand his world had all been leading toward. Not to a perfect ending, because he knew there would still be challenges ahead, still opposition to face, still difficult days to navigate, but to an honest beginning, a true partnership, a love that could weather whatever storms came, because it was built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. When Ilara reached him and took his hands, she whispered so only he could hear, "Are you sure about this? Last chance to escape before you're tied to a commoner for the rest of your life." "Not a commoner," Adrian whispered back. "My queen, my love, my everything. And I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The ceremony proceeded with all the traditional elements, but everyone present could feel that something fundamental had shifted. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Adrian kissed his new queen, the cathedral erupted in cheers that could be heard throughout the capital. The common people celebrated because one of their own had risen to the highest position in the land. The nobles who had come to accept the match celebrated because they saw genuine love and happiness, something rare enough in royal unions to be precious. And those who still disapproved kept their objections silent, because they could see that public opinion had decidedly turned in favor of the unusual union. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days, with food and drink provided for all, nobility and commoners alike. Ilara had insisted on personally overseeing the menu, working alongside the palace kitchens to create dishes that were both elegant and accessible, a perfect metaphor for the kind of queen she intended to be. She moved through the crowds with ease, speaking to servants and nobles with the same genuine interest, remembering names and details about people's lives that amazed those used to royal indifference. Adrian watched her with pride and love, seeing how naturally she wore the crown that had been placed on her head during the ceremony. She hadn't become someone different. She was still Ilara, still the woman who found joy in making bread and dreamed of a world where everyone had enough to eat. But now she had the power to make those dreams reality, and he knew she would use that power wisely and well. On the 3rd night of celebration, after the last guests had finally departed and the palace had settled into quiet, Adrian and Ilara found themselves alone in their private chambers. Ilara had kicked off her formal shoes and was sitting by the window looking out at the city that was now partly her responsibility. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked, joining her and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about my grandmother," Ilara said softly, "wishing she could have seen this, seen what became of the girl she raised in that little cottage. She always told me I could be anything I wanted, but I don't think either of us imagined this." "She'd be proud of you," Adrian said with certainty. "Not because you became queen, but because you remained yourself through all of it. You didn't change who you are to fit a crown. You're changing what the crown means." Ilara leaned her head against his shoulder. "We have a lot of work ahead of us, you know. There are still nobles who will try to undermine me, policies we need to change, systems that need reform. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Adrian replied, but we'll face it together, just like we promised. And Elara, I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to work to be worthy of the choice you made, the risk you took in trusting me again, after I had lied to you. Elara turned to face him, her green eyes serious. You've already proven yourself worthy, Adrian. The moment you chose honesty over convenience, love over duty, hope over resignation. That's when I knew that the man I had fallen for in the kitchen and the prince who knelt before me in that gazebo were truly the same person. I love you, Adrian said simply. I loved you when I was Thomas Blackwood, and I love you now as Prince Adrian. I'll love you tomorrow as King Adrian and every day after that. You're the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret the moment you said yes. I could never regret it, Elara whispered, then smiled. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had never disguised yourself as a servant. Would we have met? Would you have noticed a kitchen maid if you had only ever seen me from your royal distance? I like to think that somehow, some way, we would have found each other, Adrian said. That souls like ours are meant to connect, regardless of the circumstances. But I'm grateful I didn't have to test that theory. I'm grateful for every moment of that time in the kitchen, even the deception, because it taught me to see beyond surfaces, beyond ranks and titles, to the truth of who people really are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge over their kingdom. Then Elara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. What do you think the historians will write about us? About the prince who went undercover and the kitchen maid who became queen? Adrian smiled. I think they'll write that once upon a time, in a kingdom that was losing its way, a prince decided to seek truth instead of accepting comfortable lies. And in seeking truth, he found something far more valuable. He found love. Real love. Not the kind that's arranged or convenient, but the kind that transforms you, that makes you want to be better, that gives you the courage to change the world. That's a nice story, Elara said with a gentle laugh. But you're forgetting the most important part. What's that? That the kitchen maid was brave enough to let him in, to trust again after he had hurt her, to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than the barriers the world puts between people. She laced her fingers through his. Because that's what this really is, isn't it? It's both of us choosing to believe in something impossible and working together to make it real. You're right, Adrian agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. It's not just my story or your story, it's our story. And we're still writing it, every single day. Years passed, and the story of Prince Adrian and Queen Elara became legend in Valmont and beyond. Under their reign, the kingdom transformed. Laws were passed that protected the rights of common people, that ensured fair treatment regardless of birth, that created opportunities for those who had previously been locked out of advancement by their lack of noble blood. The court slowly evolved, becoming less a place of empty ritual and more a functioning government that actually served its people. Wynn's Bakery became the flagship of a network of training schools across the kingdom, teaching trades to those who needed them and creating pathways out of poverty. Elara never stopped working, never became the kind of distant figurehead that queens often did. She was in the streets, in the villages, listening to people's concerns and working to address them. The common people loved her for it, and even many nobles came to respect her dedication and wisdom. Adrian ruled with a steady hand and an open heart, making decisions based on what was right, rather than what was politically expeditious. Some criticized him for being too idealistic, but the prosperity and stability of the kingdom under his reign spoke for itself. And always at his side was Elara, his partner in every sense of the word, challenging him when he needed challenging, supporting him when he needed support, and reminding him daily of why they had fought so hard to build this life together. They had 4 children over the years, each one taught from birth that their worth came from their actions and character, not from their royal blood. The oldest, a daughter they named Grace, was as practical and compassionate as her mother, and showed early signs of the wisdom that would make her an excellent future queen. The others each found their own paths, encouraged by parents who believed that even princes and princesses should have the freedom to discover their own destinies. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian took Elara back to the kitchen where they had first met, now preserved as part of the Palace Museum. They stood in the quiet space, remembering that young man disguised as a servant and that brave woman who had risked everything for truth. "Do you ever miss it?" Adrian asked. "The simplicity of those days, when you were just a cook and I was just Thomas?" Elara considered the question seriously, as she always did. "Sometimes," she admitted, "there was a freedom in those days, a lack of weight. But Adrian, look at what we've built since then. Look at the lives we've changed, the system we've reformed, the hope we've given to people who had none. Could we have done any of that if we had stayed in this kitchen, pretending to be simpler than we were?" "No," Adrian agreed, "though I wouldn't trade those memories for anything. That time taught me who I wanted to be, showed me what kind of kingdom was possible. It was the foundation for everything that came after. Besides," Elara added with a mischievous smile, "we still bake bread together every Sunday morning. You've gotten much better at kneading." Adrian laughed, pulling her close. "Only because you're an excellent teacher, among your many other talents." They left the kitchen hand in hand, walking through the palace that was now truly a home, filled with laughter and love and purpose. The disguise that had brought them together was long gone, replaced by a truth that was far more powerful, the truth that love could bridge any divide, that courage could come from anywhere, and that sometimes the best way to find yourself was to step outside the role you were born into and discover who you really were beneath all the expectations and assumptions. The kingdom of Valmont thrived under their rule, becoming known throughout the land as a place where justice and mercy walked hand in hand, where opportunity was available to all who sought it, where a person's worth was measured by their character rather than their birth. And at the heart of it all were two people who had taken the courage to look beyond the surfaces, to see each other truly, and to build something remarkable together. The historians did write about them, of course. They wrote of the prince who disguised himself and the kitchen maid who became queen, of the conspiracy that was uncovered and the love that transformed a kingdom. But the real story, the one that mattered most, wasn't in those history books. It was in the lives they touched, the systems they changed, the hope they kindled in hearts that had forgotten how to dream. It was in the couple they remained, still finding time for bread making on Sunday mornings, still laughing over shared memories from that strange month when everything changed, still choosing each other every single day, even when the choice was difficult. Because that was what their story had always been about, not the fairy tale romance of different classes overcome, but the deeper truth that real love required courage, honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to fight for something that mattered, even when the entire world said it was impossible. On his deathbed many years later, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a kingdom that mourned the approaching loss of a beloved king, Adrian held Elara's hand and smiled. She was older now, her hair silver, and her face lined with the marks of a life fully lived, but to him she was as beautiful as she had been that first day in the kitchen, standing at her pastry board with flour on her hands and dreams in her eyes. "Was it worth it?" he asked softly, the question he had asked her 1,000 times over the years in 1,000 different ways. "All the struggle, all the opposition, all the difficulty of the path we chose?" Elara looked at him with those same green eyes, still clear despite her age, and squeezed his hand. "Every single moment," she said firmly. "Every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary day between. It was all worth it because we faced it together, because we chose love over convenience, truth over comfort, hope over resignation. And look what we built, Adrian. Look at the kingdom our choice created. I couldn't have done any of it without you," Adrian whispered. "You were always the brave one, the strong one. I just had the good sense to fall in love with you." "We saved each other," Elara corrected gently. "You showed me that I could be more than the world said I was, and I showed you who you truly were beneath the crown. That's what real love does. It reveals us to ourselves and gives us the courage to become who we were always meant to be." Adrian closed his eyes, content in a way that few people ever achieve, secure in the knowledge that his life had mattered, that his love had been real and returned, that the choices he had made all those years ago in a kitchen had been the right ones. And when he took his last breath, It was with Ilara's hand in his and the certainty that their story, their beautiful, impossible, true story, would live on long after they were gone. Ilara ruled as Queen Regent for 5 more years before passing the crown to Grace, who proved every bit as wise and compassionate as her parents. And even decades later, when both Adrian and Ilara had passed into memory, their story remained. It was told to children as a lesson about courage and love, referenced in debates about social reform, commemorated in songs and poems and paintings. But more than any of that, it was remembered in the changed kingdom they left behind, a place where love could conquer barriers, where courage was valued over birth, and where 2 people from different worlds had proved that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a simple, honest connection in a palace kitchen, between a prince who needed to find himself and a woman brave enough to show him the way. And so the story ends where all the best stories do, not with a convenient conclusion, but with a legacy, a reminder that real love requires courage, that change is possible when people choose honor over convenience, and that sometimes, in the search for truth, we find something far more valuable. We find our truest selves in the person who helps us become everything we were meant to be. The disguise that brought them together became unnecessary because they learned to see each other clearly, to love each other fully, and to build a life and a kingdom based on those simple, powerful truths. Some say that even now, on quiet mornings in the palace, you can still smell fresh-baked bread coming from the royal kitchens, a reminder of where it all began and what really matters, not crowns and titles and political alliances, but connection, honesty, and the kind of love that has the power to change everything. Dear beloved readers, thank you for walking through this story with me. It was written for every soul who still believes that love can transform, heal, and reveal who we truly are, beneath the layers of expectation and fear. Adrian and Ilara's journey is a reminder that the greatest love stories are not found in palaces or written in noble titles. They are found in the quiet bravery of 2 hearts willing to be honest, vulnerable, and open to the unexpected. If this tale touched your heart even a little, I invite you to continue this journey with us. Watch the other stories on the channel. Leave a comment and share what moved you most. Like the video to help it reach more hearts, and subscribe so you never miss another story crafted with soul and devotion. Thank you for being here, for reading, for feeling, and for believing in love's quiet miracles. With love, Echoes of Romance.